Today I'm going to cover how to assemble the quick change hot end plate from Yellow Jacket Concepts. The first step is empty the bag and make sure all the parts are there. You should have a bag of pins. They go with the male connector. Should have the female side of the connector. Two 3mm fan mounts. There should be 4 of the spring cage pluggable connectors. We'll cover how these work, along with 4 sockets for them. Should have 2 blue LEDs, a red LED, 2 high temp pieces of wire approximately 2.5–3 inches long, a resistor array, the board of course. Should have 3 M3 nuts and 5 M3 screws. And the reason there's 5, you need 3 for the nuts and 2 for the fan mounts if you choose to use the fan mounts. Okay, next you need to decide what type of hot end you're going to use. The CNC standard hot end will fit right in the center hole. They have a lot of space here, so if you still have your leftover pieces from when you built your kit, there should be a few of these. Work nice for a spacer. Washer, a printed spacer is good, or a nylon washer like this from McMaster Car works good, but you'll need to space that out so it clamps down tight. If you choose to use a groove mount type hot end, you'll need to knock this piece out, and then once it's out you'll have a little nub right here. You'll have to sand that smooth or shave it with a razor knife. Be very careful. And you'll have to shave out these little bumps in here because the neck of the groove mounts is a little bit bigger in diameter than the CME hot end. So to make sure that stays center for the CME hot end, I need those nubs in there. If you're using a groove mount, you have to remove them. Okay, once that's done, check, make sure your groove mount hot end will fit in there. And there's a link on the store site where you purchase the plates. A printable bracket that clamps this to the hot end, and that's what these 3 screws are for, and the nuts. Here's what the printed clamp looks like. Of course you'll have to print it before you tear your hot end apart, unless you have other printers. But it simply slides over the top of the hot end. Put your screws through here, nuts, or vice versa, however you want to do it, and that clamps the 2 pieces together and holds them center. And if you're familiar with 713 Maker, it also works with his mounts. You first insert the hot end through the board, then his bracket, push them together, and then slide it over into the hole. And you can do it with it all soldered together and assembled already. I'm just showing you now so that stuff's not in the way. On to the soldering part. I like to go from the smallest components to the biggest components. That usually works out well. You also want to decide what orientation you want your connectors here. Your main connector pretty much has to be on top. You want to line this one bump here up with the yellow, heavy yellow line on that side. Plus there's alignment holes here that line up with the bumps on the bottom edge, so you can't really get it backwards. That's where that's going to go. We won't solder it yet. Then these really don't matter if you put them this way or if you want to mount them underneath. You just want to pay attention to your polarity when you go to plug in your connectors and hook your wires to them. In this board revision here, I have an additional place that you can put your thermistor. As in the previous editions, there was issues with some of the hot ends hitting the thermistor mount. You can either put it down here, you can put it on top, you can put it over on this edge, either side as well. You can also just direct wire it if you want and don't need the connector. But I'm going to start soldering with the resistor array and the heating LED, which is usually the red one. Obviously you can make it any color you want. I think I'm going to make mine yellow. So I'm going to replace my red one with the yellow. Now I'm going to go ahead and make one of my blue LEDs a green, just because I like to be difficult. Something about the blue LEDs, my supplier can't make up their mind. You may get LEDs like this, you might get LEDs like this with the little fins. If you have those, that stops the LED from going all the way through the board. But if you remember which side goes where, I'll show you later. We'll cut these off and you can put it all the way down flat on the board. When installing the LEDs, there's a polarity mark on the board. There's a little dot, and actually the circle's not round, it's flat on one side. That is the cathode side of the LED, or negative side. And on an LED, the negative side is the short lead. And you can also tell by the LED having a fatter side on the right hand side, in this picture on the right hand side, and the anode is a little bit skinnier. So that's how you can tell which way is the positive and negative if your pins get cut off. So you want to line your short lead up, or your negative side, with the side that has the dot. I'm going to solder that LED in, and the resistor array. The resistor array is also polarized, and you want the lettering facing out, facing this way. Because if you get it in backwards, one of your LEDs will light fine, the other two probably won't light at all, or they'll be very dim. A resistor array is a group of resistors that are all connected together by a common pin. A resistor network is a group of resistors all contained in the same package, but they are still independent of themselves. And that's a 4.7K resistor. It'll still allow enough current for your LEDs to be bright enough on 12 volt, and it'll keep the resistor from getting too hot if you're running 24 volt. Okay, next I'm going to install these two LEDs. Like I was saying earlier, the LEDs, blue LEDs you might get might have this little tab. You can leave them on there if you want and just solder it down to there. You can either put it in and just solder it in there like that if you want, or if you want them to go all the way to the board, just remember which side's the cathode and anode, cut them off, put them all the way down to the board. But for this, I think I'll use the one that don't have them. Next we want to solder these connectors in. When this board is a thicker material than most circuit boards for stiffness and rigidity, and as you can see, the pins don't go all the way through the board. So when soldering these, As you can see on the one I've already done, you want to fill that hole with solder as much as you can. And the easiest way to do that is get your connector lined up, hold it with your finger or clamp or however you want to hold it, and put a little bit of solder on the tip of your iron and let that heat up down into the hole and tack your connector in place. Now in the other hole, the one you didn't tack, you want to do that next. Put a little solder on your tip, go into the hole and just feed solder into the hole until it fills that hole up nice and good. You got a little round dome there on top. And then go back and do your first tacked hole. And then give it a good tug to make sure it's secure. Okay, I have all my connectors, the small connectors in place. I decided to put my thermistor connection out the top. I'll bring my thermistor wires up through this open hole here and plug it in there. Your fan mounts go here. You probably want to mount them this way so all your fan is blowing down. The only issue with that, you may want to check on your particular printer if mounting the fan down on the bottom side is going to interfere with the effector plate when you go to mount this back on your printer, unless you plan on mounting it under the effector plate, which I've seen on occasion. And that, if it does interfere, you may want to mount it up a little higher. You'll still get most of your airflow across your peak. I'm going to choose not to use the fan mounts because I'll be using a different print head on this that has the fan already mounted to it. So next you want to solder this in, and again this tab here lines up with the heavy yellow spot on the board. Make sure it's set and flat. These pins do come all the way through, so it's a little easier to solder. Okay, the last thing to solder would be your actual heater cartridge. If it's a raw stock CME-CNC standard hot end, you need wires to connect to your resistors. So these would solder in here and here. It's your positive, negative connections there. You strip enough wire so you can push it all the way through and solder on the top side. My hot end comes with a separate heat cartridge, so I'll be soldering that into the board, so I won't be needing these. But one tip is the traces are so heavy on these two connections. When you solder these in, you have to give it time to heat up because the trace will suck the heat away from the connection, and it might be a little hard to get the solder to melt. But just be patient, keep your soldering iron on there a little bit longer, feed it some solder so it gets good heat transfer, and it'll start wicking in there pretty quickly. Next I want to talk about these connectors here. Okay, the way these pluggable connectors work is very simple. You got a little spring cage in here. The round hole, the larger round hole is where the wire goes. This narrow skinny hole is for a screwdriver that can release the spring. Now you always want to check your polarity on the connector, make sure you got your hot and ground in the right pin. You probably can't see it. There's a number 1 on one of the pins. On the quick change board, pin 1 is positive and pin 2 is ground. So And then what you do is you just trim your wire back up to 1/4 inch at the most. Twist your wires together. Sometimes it helps to tin them a little bit with some solder. The fan already may have tinned ends on them. You just insert it into the larger round hole. You'll feel a little bit of resistance. You just keep pushing until it stops, and then it's in there. Now if you have a problem and it won't go in and the wire keeps bending, one thing you can do is insert a screwdriver first. A little narrow jeweler screwdriver. Then insert your wire, pull the screwdriver out, and that locks it. And that's all you have to do. No pinning, no soldering. And if you ever have to change your fan, you don't have to waste your connector. You just put a little screwdriver in there, pull your wires right out, and you can reuse the connector.